Hello everybody. Thanks for watching my video. This is a ketogenic fasting project number 24. And if you look into ketosis and you have the least bit of concern about cholesterol, you may very well have come across Dave Feldman. He's a fit guy who got into ketogenics and then saw his cholesterol shoot up. So he started looking into why that happens. And he was recently on a podcast. So he's in quite a few podcasts and video presentations, but one in particular I was looking at. It was on human performance outliers with Zach Bitter and Sean Baker. Their podcast number 11. And it was absolutely fascinating because he had two other top tier athletes asking him questions, and he has a pretty polished presentation. So he's got some good analogies on explaining what's going on, or at least what they theorize what's going on with cholesterol. As you may remember from one of my earlier videos, I'd talked about the book Cholesterol Clarity, written by Jimmy Moore. I had to listen to that two or three times to really just absorb what was going on in that book. Um, and then Dave Feldman takes it a whole another leap forward from there. So one of the themes that you find when it comes to talking about cholesterol and understanding cholesterol in modern terms, first of all, that the current lipid panel that they do is probably 30 years out of date. And you can get more advanced lipid panels from like Quest Diagnostics, and from what I understand, they're not that expensive. You can spend like $40 and go to some lab or clinic, and they'll draw the blood, and somebody will send you the test results. And I think it's legal to do it without a doctor's writing the order if you're paying out of pocket in most places. So something I've certainly considered, but of course, once you get the information, what do you do with it? Well, one of the things that gets talked about a lot is particle size, like the LDL-P size or little p. And Feldman gets into some theories as to why these particle sizes change, because the light, fluffy LDL is not considered to be as dangerous as a small, dense LDL. So why is that? Well, his theory is that what's happening is that light, fluffy one is carrying some cargo. Once it's dropped off most of its cargo, it becomes a smaller, lighter particle, right? Or it's a smaller, denser particle. So that seems like a natural process that's going on there. Um, Feldman does a lot of experiments on himself, and he talks about gaining a bunch of fat and how he did it. So that he could track some numbers and see what's going on in his own body. You got to admire a guy like that who believes in himself being a guinea pig, and who knows he's got to be his own best doctor. I mean, that's how I see it. That's the lens I see it through. He's come up with a term he calls lean mass hyperresponder theory. So he talks about if you're, a nice fit athletic type person and you go into ketosis, that your body can respond very swiftly and in a large way to what's going on. And as you can see in the slide, it's usually athletic, lean, low triglycerides, and you get high LDL, which is generally considered bad. But the prevailing theory is it's only considered bad because people don't understand what's going on. This whole study of cholesterol or lipidology or whatever is not all that well explored, um, at least not in a satisfactory way where people really clearly understand what's going on inside the human body. He makes the analogy of LDL and HDL being like little boats that are transporting primarily energy packets around the body, but we know that cholesterol is also involved in um, in repair. So uh, it the cholesterol itself, aside from the two transport molecules or two transport proteins, LDL and HDL, is actually part of every cell in the body. So both LDL and HDL are involved in the transport of cholesterol and other substances, both for supplying energy and repairing and making new cells. One of the big concerns, of course, is that we see arterial sclerosis in coronary arteries and sometimes the arteries in the neck, and that blockage is made up of things like LDL proteins and cholesterol, and so that's where we get this whole idea that eating foods high in cholesterol will cause heart disease, which we know now that it's not a dietary consumption of cholesterol that clogs the arteries. He makes a point that in tests, when they want to give a lab animal clogged arteries, they literally go and expand a balloon in the artery to damage the cell walls, or what they call endothelial cells, which line the artery. So when they physically damage them, they send out a signal, and basically LDL responds like an ambulance and comes over and covers up those damaged cells. So that's a normal process, and that's also what we link to inflammatory disease. So when the arterial walls, let's say your coronary arteries near your heart that are notorious for getting clogged, become clogged because the tissue gets inflamed, quite possibly because of a high carbohydrate diet, or maybe an infection, or in the case of a lab animal, it's been crushed with a balloon. Then the LDL and the cholesterol comes along and coats it to protect it. Now, if you keep irritating it, you keep accumulating thicker and thicker deposits, because those cells are giving off the signal that's attracting these materials. And there seems to be both ketogenic and plant-based diets that can reverse this. But at first, you got to get rid of whatever's causing the irritation or the inflammation or the physical damage, right? In the absence of inflammation, you don't see arterial sclerosis very much. And the other component is oxidative stress, or what's also known as free radicals. And I've made this point before. It seems odd to me that people promote eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and other plant-based materials, because that is where most of the free radicals come from in our diet. So when I see, like I said, I see a commercial for, berries or pomegranate juice, and it says, oh, loaded with antioxidants. And I'm thinking, well, you're just eating more carbohydrates to counteract the effect of other carbohydrates you ate. In a way, it doesn't make any sense, because on one hand, this is a big concern in research and health right now, is oxidative stress and free radicals, and they're essentially pimping a diet that increases it, and could very well be the source of inflammation and coronary artery disease. So forgetting the name of the arteries in your neck, but this could very well be what causes them to be inflamed, send out a signal to the body to send LDL and cholesterol to repair them, right? So here we have sort of a paradox. Why are we recommending a diet that raises oxidative stress, yet oxidative stress is a huge concern? Dave Feldman also made some good points about ketones, ketone bodies, and ketosis. The most accurate thing we can measure right now is beta hydroxybutyrate, or frequently referred to as BHB, because you can use a meter very much like when you use to measure blood glucose if you happen to be diabetic or you're just curious about your blood like some of us. You stick your finger, get a little drop of blood, put it on a special test strip, put it in a special meter, and it tells you how much beta hydroxybutyrate there is. And there's kind of an established clinical number of 0.5 millimolars. It puts you in clinical or nutritional ketosis. Some people are arguing that that should really be like zero point 0.3 millimolars. So it's entirely possible that people are saying the same benefits. And of course, depending on how adapted you are, the level of beta hydroxybutyrate or acetone or whatever could vary, and it could depend on how active you are. Because if you're really active and you're burning it up, then the levels are going to drop because your body's going to need time to catch up, as opposed to somebody who's sitting around with lots of it accumulating in their blood and they're not really using it, and their bodies might slow down the production, but there's still a reserve in their blood supply. So anyways, he also reminds us that that's only a fraction of the fuel from fat. There's all kinds of um, fat molecules, or trying to remember the name of them, but um, fatty acid strings that are also transported as fuel. So most of the tissue in the body actually gets its fuel from the fatty acids that are transported that have not been broken down into the ketone bodies. They're the primary fuel source in the case of ketosis, even though we're measuring the beta hydroxybutyrate, just because the beta hydroxybutyrate is easier to measure and the numbers for that are already established. So he gets into describing VLDL, which is a larger molecule that transports these around the body. So I highly recommend you watch some of these videos if you want to understand cholesterol. It's very, very informative. Not that you're going to know everything, but we're going to know more than we did. And eventually, hopefully, we can put this puzzle together. Uh, Basically, this slide's just saying what I just said, that, most of the tissue is actually fed with larger fatty acids. And even though we think about ketosis and ketone bodies, and then further complicate things, I guess beta hydroxybutyrate isn't necessarily a ketone, but it's considered a ketone body. And we measured those. It's actually the larger fatty acid molecules that do most of the tissue feeding. I think I got a duplicate. So yeah, the staggering number of transport molecules, he was saying it's like 7.5 quintillion LDL particles are generated by the liver and then reabsorbed in a week, at least for an athlete. So you can imagine a staggering number. And so when you see a little number of, you got a total cholesterol of 300 or whatever, you got an LDL of 150 or 200, you can imagine that's a tiny little sample at any given moment, and these numbers are fluctuating drastically based on activity and feeding and everything. So it's all not quite as cut and dry. And I think Sean Baker made the point that you could have this little sample, one test of your cholesterol, and your doctor may say, well, let's put you on statins now, and then you might be taking, something like Lipitor for the rest of your life based on one little test. So perhaps we all want to think about doing more homework and more research and more testing before we commit to taking a pharmaceutical that we may or may not need. So these are some terms for you. The VLDL is kind of a newer one to me, and so is the IDL. The HDL and the LDL, of course, are, if you've done any reading or any homework on cholesterol, you're going to know those two proteins. But the information's growing, and these other two types of cholesterol transport proteins are something that we should probably all get to know. He also talked about remnant cholesterol. So if you take, I believe if you take your um, the percentage of your LDL and your HDL and you add them up and then you subtract them from the whole number, the remnant is your remnant cholesterol. And apparently that's going to be a significant number to keep your eye on. Another concept he talked about was fat threshold, which I thought was fascinating. So even though you're pumping out fat and it's being transported around your body in your bloodstream, you only have so many sites that it can actually attach to be broken down into fuel or to be absorbed into the cells. So you can reach a maximum amount that you have now delivered more fat than your body can process. So you're kind of hitting a point of diminishing return, which can fluctuate how your body behaves as well. And then made me think of Dr. Fung talking about how people's ability to absorb sugar goes down not just because the cells have been overexposed to insulin and they become resistant to the insulin signal, but also because the cells are full and they don't want any more sugar. So you, in theory, you can hit a sugar threshold, which causes high blood pressure, and you have full cells of sugar, which causes all kinds of diseases like neuropathy and ulcers and blindness and everything else. But now they're starting to identify this fat threshold where you can't absorb anymore, which probably all goes back to um, just overfeeding. And maybe one of the best ways to cure that is to do a little fasting, right? So I'd like to thank everybody for listening or watching my video here. Please subscribe. I hope you guys stay inspired. I'm putting more and more links in the right below the video. I know some of them didn't have any in the past, so I'm going through and adding them in. So look for links for the videos I talk about in the podcast, plus links to other sites that have more information. I hope everybody stays curious, and I hope more people join me on this journey to figure out what's going on in our bodies and how to be as healthy as possible. And I hope the information here directly helps somebody else out there. All right, thank you.